This is Radiant Voices Media.
Hey there, and welcome to the Transparently Jordan podcast, where I'll be talking with a new guest each week, and we'll be covering topics in health, fitness, lifestyle, and so much more. So stick around and let's get into today's episode. Hey everybody, and welcome to today's episode. Today is a solo episode. I recently, last weekend, finished the Melbourne 70.3, and I shouldn't say I finished the full thing. The swim was canceled, so that's a chat on its own, and the disappointment with that. But, I got home from the Melbourne 70.3, sat on my couch, and this wave of depression hit me. So today's episode is about that post-race crash that none of us really talk about. It is very common for us to talk about the lead up to events, to talk about the highs, to talk about the work that is put into the events, but nobody really talks about the aftermath. Nobody talks about the depression that hits, the reaching the peak, and then what? I crossed the finish line at Melbourne. I ran past that red carpet, months of 12 to 15-hour training weeks, long rides, early swims, sacrifices that I've never sacrificed before, basically. And then when it finally ended and I got home, instead of feeling proud, I kind of felt empty in a sense. So today is about that. Today is about this feeling that a lot of us feel, whether it is a triathlete, whether it is a long distance runner, a bodybuilder, or just somebody who has reached your goal. I think this is a feeling that is very common, and going from a high to low is something that is not talked about enough. Now, I want to go through a bit of a narrative. I want to go through what it took for me to get to where I was on Sunday. I started this journey 14 weeks prior. I was not new to triathlon. I was new to something as intense as a half Ironman. I can only imagine what it'll take for a full Ironman, which is on my list, of course. But I essentially 6 days a week had 2 to 3 sessions a day. I also work as a physiotherapist. I have this podcast. I have my other side business as well, the media business, the podcast business. I have a very busy professional life. So to be training 1 to 2 hours per session times 3 a day, my days were quite jam-packed. I always thought that it took a lot when I trained for marathons. I always thought that I had to give up a lot for marathons, but I really didn't realize the other things that I was still able to get done training for a marathon. And that's not taking away from marathon running. I think you do have to give up a lot and you have to make those sacrifices, but my hats off to triathletes, hats off to people that do half Ironmans or even a full Ironman. Like, that is impressive to me, because training 14 to 16 hours a week was a lot. I essentially had times where I was excited, I had nervous feelings, but I also kind of had this obsession. I had this obsession of finishing the 70.3. I wanted to finish the swim, which was probably the thing that I was most nervous about. I wanted to finish the bike. I wanted to get to the run because I knew that's what I would excel in. I worked so hard over those 14 weeks. And then you get to race day. I essentially got there on the Friday. The event was the Sunday. And you just had this build. Like, I was walking around the course on Friday did a bit of a cycle of the course and really started to get excited. I walked the course, saw them setting up the red carpet, and scrolling through Instagram and socials, you see people running down past this red carpet to the finish line, and just the feeling of that is phenomenal. Basically, to have all of this hard work and to be hitting the finish line, it was just a feeling like no other, basically. But then you finish the event, you get that medal, you go home, you shower, you finish the day, wake up the next day, and you just have this sudden drop. For me, it wasn't exactly the next day because I drove back the next day to Adelaide. So I was in the car for about 7 hours, in the zone, listening to podcasts. It really didn't hit me until I actually got home. I literally, after the 7 hour drive, got home. The first thing that I did was hit the sofa. And I kid you not, just this wave of emptiness hit me. I'm not going to make this episode about, I think, what else the emptiness was, going through this such pivotal moment in my life. One of the pivotal moments. I mean, I want to go back and actually do a 70.3 that where the swim isn't canceled, so I can officially say that I've done one. But, going through this moment, but also going through it alone in a sense. Like, I don't have a partner. I drove up by myself. Um, I think that was a part of it, but I think another huge part was I was finished. And I remember getting home. I think it was maybe 2:30, 3 p.m. in Adelaide, and didn't really have anything else to do. Like, I had a couple days off of work from the clinic, and I was thinking to myself, well, now what? If I had days off from work, essentially prior to the 70.3, I would have been filling those days with bike, swim, run, and all of that, really, and recovering in between. But essentially, I was just so confused. I was sitting there thinking, why am I sad? I should be proud. And I just had this pivotal moment. I just was so high, essentially, a couple of days ago. And I did make an Instagram reel about this, just a little chat through this. So definitely go in and watch that if you'd like. But I think, like, this mental and emotional emptiness just really hit me for some reason. I realized that I didn't have the routine anymore. I didn't have this purpose anymore. And that's what I really wanted to talk about, is this purpose. Like, I realized in that moment that I attached my purpose and I attached my identity so much to being a triathlete, to the sport of triathlon, that when it was done, I was like, well, now what? I didn't have anything else. I can admit, over the last 14 weeks leading up to the event, I've maybe let relationships drop a little bit. I haven't been as social. I have let the business side of things slip a little bit. I've still been working on that kind of stuff, but, I haven't really been planning new projects or other things, that I could be excited for, so that when I finished the event, I had other things to be excited for. And I think that was a main realization for me, was that you need to have other goals. You need to have other things to be excited about. When you are working for an end goal, whatever it might be, for me, it was the Melbourne 70.3, you still need to have other purposes. Otherwise, when it's done, you're done. All right, I want to talk to you about sunglasses made for runners by runners. That's why I wear Your Run sunglasses. Lightweight, zero bounce, and they stay locked in even when you are sweating through speed sessions, long runs, out in the sun, whatever it might be. They are stylish enough for daily wear, durable enough for race day, and just the perfect combo. Honestly, I love brands that get the sport, get the grind, and support the running community, not just the podium finishers. If you're serious about your run gear and want shades that perform as hard as you, go check out Your Run. Use my code Jordan10 to save some money and get yourself some stylish sunnies that actually perform and look good. Run smart, stay protected, look good doing it with Your Run sunnies. I think, yes, I do have other races and other things to look forward to, but that can't be the only thing. I think that was something that I really, over the last week, have realized that I didn't have any other goals. And that is probably why I felt so depressed. That is why the dopamine crash hit. I think that, in a combination of what I mentioned before, this loss of structure, I had a few days where there was nothing on my training plan, and I was like, well, what do I do with my time? Because that was really what I was doing with my time was 3 sessions a day sometimes, gym and then bike and run, or a swim in there, or whatever it might be. So I think the fact that I didn't have that structure was something that really hit as well. One thing that I think also was a realization was this pressure versus relief. I think sometimes finishing exposes kind of the emotional load you've been carrying. I feel like I went into it with so much pressure on myself, but also worrying about what others might have thought, which I think it was terrible to go into because, I, as you might know, am very public on social media. I post a lot. I post about my training and what I'm doing and this and that. And I think I didn't want to look like an idiot if I performed bad or if I didn't finish or this and that. And I think this pressure and this emotional load was something that I shouldn't have really been carrying. I should have just been worrying about my race and worrying about myself and not what others were thinking. And that is something that I have been trying to work on recently, was only focusing on me and not what others think. It is a work in progress, but I think that is something that is super important, is going into something with a little bit less pressure and not being so hard on yourself can really help coming out of that, event and not going through this depressed state, basically. All right, let's talk about supplements that actually earn a spot in my routine. Not hype, just results. I love the Tropica matcha because I love clean energy without the crash. But also I like how this matcha is smooth, it's not bitter, and I genuinely look forward to having it every day. There's also the pineapple creatine. Creatine isn't just for muscle performance, you guys. There is more research coming out about how it supports mental clarity, mood, etc., etc. If you train, think, move, breathe, you should be taking creatine, in my opinion. So definitely try this pineapple flavored creatine. It tastes amazing. At nighttime, I also love their beauty custard. It legit tastes like dessert and supports recovery while I sleep. It is collagen, so it's great for the skin, the hair, joints, longevity. Both men and women, everybody should be taking collagen. If you want to level up your routine and feel good from the inside out, Tropica delivers. You guys can use my code JordSday10 at checkout to save yourself some money. That's JORDZDAY10 at checkout. JordSday10. I think a lot of things that we do to cope with this post-event crash is immediately signing up for the next thing or having the next thing already planned. Basically, that is a very common thing for athletes to do, is to have event after event after event planned so that there is not this crash. But what if you get injured and you can't do that second event? What if something else happens and you can't do that event? You're still going to then have that depression and that crash. So I think it just goes back to tying that in with having other things part of your identity, because if the sport stops temporarily for whatever reason, or the activity stops temporarily because you get injured or because, you have something going on in your life or whatnot, you can't, you need to have something else to fall on, something else to enjoy, because I think it's so boring to not have something to look forward to when you wake up in the morning. What I think I'm going to try to focus on is giving myself a bit of a more zero pressure approach to my training. I think letting myself go into events for me, and maybe with multiple goals that are a little less performance based, is something that I think is going to be super important, because that way, if I don't reach, that time, or that way, if I do reach that time or whatever, I've still come out feeling good. I think a lot of the times we go into a marathon, for example, with I need to hit sub 3 hours, or I need to hit sub 250 or whatever it might be. But I think there needs to be more than that. Like, you have worked so hard for an event, and for you to only think about placing first or hitting a certain time or whatever it might be just takes away from the whole experience. If you've run a marathon, I know social media might not make it seem as impressive anymore, but it's freaking impressive, okay? And if you listening right now are, even training for your first 5K event, like, having goals other than I need to finish it under this time or whatever is so important, because I think it also keeps you motivated, or keeps this habits going, and builds your love for the activity as well. I think you need to love the activity. Otherwise, you're going to hit your time goal, and then what? I think that's why a lot of people quit maybe sometimes, is because you've reached that goal and it's like, oh, okay, well, I've had that dopamine, on to the next thing, really. I think another thing that I want to start doing is practicing that everyday life. A little bit more balance is key. Yes, it takes a lot of time to train for a half Ironman. I can't even imagine again what it's going to be like for a full Ironman, but I can imagine that you can still have time for other things, whether that might be once a week, whether that might be setting a time. Can we go out for coffee for 30 minutes? I think that's still important. I think it's still important to work on other hobbies. I didn't, for that full 14 weeks, I didn't work on, I have something else coming out and something that I've wanted to do for however long I can think of, really. It's probably one of the most exciting things that, you know, to think about when I launch. It's one of the most exciting things ever, but I didn't work on it for the last 14 weeks. And the fact that now I am starting to work, I'm so excited, about building this business, about building this brand. And like it, it's something that I should have still embedded into my everyday, whether it again was only working on it 30 minutes a week. I think still having that would have lessened the blow of having that post-event crash, really. And finally, those micro goals are super important. Having something fun and not stressful to work into your training as well, so that it's not just about that end goal, which I think for a lot of us it is. So I think your worth isn't tied to an event. And that's so important to realize and to remember, that you need to have a worth and you need to have an identity outside of the Melbourne 70.3 or outside of the Ironman. If you don't, then you are going to go through this depression state after an event. You need to have goals, but have goals that give us purpose and don't define us, basically. And I think it's also important to remember that it's okay to feel lost. It's okay to feel flat. It's okay to feel sad. Um, you might feel that after reaching a massive event and a massive success, and it's okay to feel those things, but you can't dwell on those things. If you do, then it's going to be that much harder to get back into routine, or it's going to be that much harder to plan that next goal, basically. So essentially, if you are working towards something right now, what I would recommend is try to have other things still embedded in your day to day life. Try to have other goals. Try to have other avenues that are outside of the activity that you're doing, and really try to maintain some relationships that you have, basically. If you have any stories of post event crashes, please let me know. Head to Instagram. Let me know in the post, in the comments of, this week's episode, what your post event crash was and your experience. I think, again, this is something that's not talked about. We don't talk about our post event crash. We talk about the lead up. We talk about the build up and reaching the goal and the fancy success and, all the pretty, but we don't talk about the aftermath. And I would love to hear your experience with a post event crash, whether it be an event, whether it be reaching a certain goal in business. What is your experience? Let me know. And also, before we leave, if you can give the podcast a 5-star review, that really helps out the podcast. Thank you for listening to today's episode, today's solo episode. I will talk to you all in the next one.